Greetings, one and all. I am the amazing Tekking, and here by my side is my lovely assistant, Barry the Brick. And today, we will mesmerize you with magical feats that will leave you mesmerized. Yes, for my first trick, behold, it seems to be a solid object. But if you see here, I have broken it. Oh no! How could I possibly get it back to... look at that! Nothing up my sleeve. Okay, so that first magic trick might not have been up to stuff, but I have something that's even better than this. Behold, 2 quarters! As you can see, these quarters have nothing special about them, and they cannot stick together. However, with just a magical thing, I could do this. Okay, apparently they're not magnetic, but that's important to know because I can just do this. Yeah, check that out. See, that was the real magic trick the whole time. Okay, so how do magnets work? Does anybody know that? Like, actually how magnets work? You know, it's okay, scientists, if you haven't got an explanation for it. I think that's what's really going on here, okay? The scientists of the world want us to think that magnets, like, they have those all figured out. Like, it's like electromagnetism, you know, polarities. No, you guys can come out and say that, like, hey, listen, it's straight up magic. We have no idea how this stuff works, okay? So, yeah, it's okay. I think we can all understand. All right, so yes, today's video, we're going to be talking about Eustass Kid's Devil Fruit, the Magnet Nomi, or the Geeky Nomi, the Devil Fruit that Oda purportedly did want to reveal the name of, like, years and years ago. In fact, he thought that he did, and then, like, people were like, what's Kid's Devil Fruit name? Because we haven't gotten it yet. It's a little bit strange, considering at this point he was already fighting with Kaido, and he had been prevalent, maybe not as prevalent as a lot of people thought he was going to be during Wano, but we saw a lot of Eustass throughout Wano, and now here he is, you know, rampaging through Onigashima, you know, Killer is there and everything. They had that little moment back at the Udon prison and everything like that after Killer ate the smile and became a pleasure, basically, with the laughter and everything. And so now Kid was fighting against, you know, Kaido alongside Luffy and Zoro and Law and everybody like that. And it's so weird that we haven't gotten his Devil Fruit name. And they asked Oda the question in an SBS, and Oda was like, what? Wait, we don't know? I thought I revealed that, like, years ago. Oh, okay, yeah, it's the Geeky Nomi, it's the Magnet Fruit, there you go. I mean, like I said, you know, before when I mentioned this in the SBS video, it's just like, you know, Oda has a lot of stuff on his plate, he just forgot, which is really funny considering that I think a lot of people that were fans of Eustass wanted to have him have, like, a really, really big moment in this arc, and yeah, he certainly has had a few, but maybe not as much as people wanted him to. You know what I mean? So it's kind of apt that Oda forgot to reveal the name of his Devil Fruit earlier on, right? It's nothing crazy. It's like, I think there was a good reason why Oda did not reveal the name of Law's fruit during the Sabaody Archipelago arc, because I think he wanted us to be a little bit, like, dumbfounded by it, because when we got to see Law, Luffy, and Kid go up against the Marines at the auction house, we had Luffy, of course, using the Gumu Nomi. I mean, that's obvious, right? Yeah, and then we have Kid using some sort of magnetic ability to, like, repel cannonballs and stuff, so it wasn't really a far stretch for us to say, like, oh, okay, he probably has some sort of magnetic Devil Fruit. But then Law steps up to plate with his room and shambles and all his crazy nonsense, and we're just like, what is this guy's ability, right? I have no idea what this is, right? So it makes sense that Oda would maybe put that on the back burner for a little bit, let us, like think about it, before it was finally revealed as the Op fruit during Punk Hazard, right? So honestly, I think you probably could have just revealed that Eustass's Devil Fruit was the Geeky Nomi during Sabaody. It's not really going to blow anybody's minds. Like, what? The guy that seems to have control over magnetic forces has the magnet fruit? It's insane. But the other reason why we're talking about that today is because in the recent edition of the One Piece magazine, we actually have the concept art for what the Geeky Nomi actually looks like. And my god, I thought that Crocodile's fruit design, which I don't think I've ever actually made a video about that one, but yeah, Crocodile's Suna, or the Sand fruit, literally just looks like a cactus. Like, it is a cactus, which means at some point Crocodile had to find that fruit, pick it up. First and foremost, that's going to be a problem, like, just, like, literally picking up a cactus and then just biting into it. Ah, yes, this is the Devil Fruit I've been seeking for so long. okay, and then he turns into sand and he's like, yeah, this is the punishment I must endure, right? So yeah, it was a little bit of pain he had to deal with. Oh, boo-hoo, Crocodile had to eat a cactus. Well, whatever. This brings it to a whole new level. In terms of devil fruits that do not look edible and rather look like it would be excruciatingly painful to consume, I would say Kid's magnet fruit is at the top now, okay? Literally, look at this thing. Does this look like something you want to eat? Does this look like something you would ever want to eat? No, okay? Even if you told me eating this gives you magic powers, I would still be like, like the cactus thing is like, okay, if you eat this cactus, you'll receive a superpower. You'll be able to turn into sand at will. Alright, I guess after I eat it, I could just turn into sand and it wouldn't hurt anymore, so I guess that's like a positive there, right? It's like, yeah, sure. But this isn't even a Logia. This is a Paramecia, which means Kid had to bite into this just hoping that it was a devil fruit, right? The design is so unique. I think you couldn't not think it is a devil fruit, right? I mean, look at this thing. It literally looks like a bunch of jagged scrap metal that was compiled together and then has a copper wire running around it, okay? In terms of just aesthetic, the ones that we've seen so far in the story, every time there's a new edition of the One Piece magazine, Oda will draw 2 new devil fruits, ones we've seen already in the story, but actually give them their designs, and I love that he does that to kind of like expand on the world building a little bit. But in terms of those designs so far, I think the geeky nomi is my favorite. It's very striking. It's bold, right? Okay, it's like a bunch of metal with like the lightning bolt kind of aesthetic kind of popping off of it, and then the copper wire, which, okay, I'm gonna, and this is one of those videos where I have to beseech you, the viewers, anybody out there that knows a lot more about magnets than I do, because this is one of those things, like, usually when I'm talking about stuff in One Piece that I'm not familiar with, like, if it's geography or mythology, I'm on that. I'm good to go. But if it's something else, like, that I'm not really aware of, like, what exactly the properties of rubber are, for instance, right? With all those theories that we had a few weeks ago, right? Like, what was resin and stuff like that. I have to do some really just simple research on the internet, and when it comes to magnets, like, they are so complicated. Like, it's one of those things that we use, like, pretty much every day in our regular lives, but you don't really stop to think of just how, like, really complicated these are, I guess, like, or how complicated they can be. Obviously, like, these little magnets that I bought at the dollar store, probably not all that complex, but then you have things like rail guns and like electromagnetism and things and generators and stuff and all the things, all the electronics in the world that have like magnets in them or, use magnets in various ways. You start thinking about it, it's very complicated, right? So anybody out there that's an engineer that knows a lot about this, or just a generic scientist, I went to college just to be a generic scientist. I got my generic scientist degree. I'm just a scientist for everything, right? Anybody that knows more about this, please, pipe up and let me know how exactly magnets work, or if they really are indeed magic or whatever, right? But the little that I do know is the stuff that I've read in Dr. Stone. And if anybody knows anything about Dr. Stone, you know about probably a good 50% of that manga is usually spent just taking metal objects and then wrapping wire around said metal objects. That happens so often in Dr. Stone. It's like, wow. No, the idea of the design of the geeky nomi is like a copper wire magnet, I guess, is what Oda was going for here. But man, yeah. So, we saw an image of Kid when he was a kid. Oda drew all of the supernovas as children, and we see him with like a wrench and also like a toy robot, which is indicative of his like punk rotten ability that we see later, the giant metal robo that he makes with his power. So I like to think maybe Kid and Killer as well, because they grew up in the same general area. I like to think they grew up in kind of like a giant scrap yard or like a scrap heap or like some kind of like power plant, maybe kind of region area, something like that, right? Some kind of like similar to Spider Miles in the north where Doflamingo grew up, right? And maybe the Gray Terminal a little bit. And maybe Kid's parents or whoever raised him might have been really good at like engineering and like mechanic work, okay? And so maybe that's where Kid got, interested in this sort of stuff and learned about it. And then maybe one day while sifting through like the trash heap and the scrap metal or whatever, he finds thing and he thinks, he's like, Killer is like, hey, Eustass, I dare ya, 10 berries that you eat that thing. It's just like, you think I can't? Okay. And, you know, I could just say it actually was a fruit. Like, it looks metal and, like, copper wiring, but it really was, like, an actual fruit. Like, you could bite into it. It tastes disgusting like all other devil fruits, but you could actually eat it. No, no, no. I like to think it actually does have the consistency of metal. Like, you know, Kid actually bit into it and, like, cracked his teeth, and he was like, oh. And Killer's like, I was kidding, man. I was kidding. He's like, like his mouth is bleeding, but he's like, oh no, no, I need those 10 berries. And he eventually manages to eat it, and he gets the power of the geeky nomi. They were just his baby teeth. It was fine. He lost his baby teeth, and they grew in perfectly fine. But yeah, that's the situation what happened there. Okay. So yeah, throughout One Piece, we've seen Kid utilize this ability in a bunch of different ways, and actually there's a lot more potential with this fruit. I would say not as much as, like, Law's Oppie Nomi, because that one is just absurdly broken with how much stuff you can do with that. But in the hands of somebody that knows a lot about mechanics and engineering, like Kid certainly does, this fruit could be very useful. I don't think we've even seen a fraction of what Kid's, like, full breadth of this fruit is. But the first ability we saw him use at Sabaody was just Repel, which allowed him to repel any sort of, you know, metal object that I guess could be, you know, magnetically charged. Because apparently, I wasn't joking. I really didn't know quarters were not, like, okay, here's a question for scientists. What are quarters made out of? Because apparently not magnetic. I always assumed they were, but they are clearly not, okay? So I guess anything that has iron in it or anything that's magnetic, Kid can bounce back using his ability. And when he uses this power, sparks, like a few indicators of, like, electromagnetism come out of his body and then fire it back at very high velocity, okay? Seems to be whatever velocity is firing at Kid, he can bounce it back. That's another question, I guess, I have for a lot of people. So I guess it just depends on how strong the magnet is, but would that be feasible? Let's say you take an iron cannonball, and then here's something for Mythbusters. You take an iron cannonball, launch it, and if you had a powerful enough magnet, probably nothing that you could get like on the regular market, but something that you could actually build in a laboratory, a powerful enough magnet, could you, in theory, bounce that cannonball right back at the cannon? Probably would not go right back in a straight line. It would probably, like, bounce away at a different angle. But if the magnet was strong enough, even if you have something like a bullet being fired out of a gun beyond the speed of sound or at the speed of sound, a magnet powerful enough, could it, like, not even hit the magnet? It's like before it even hits the magnet, it bounces back. Like, is that feasible? Okay, obviously this is anime logic, so it is here, but I'm talking like in real life. Could you do that, right? I like to think this was Kid's first technique that he learned. It was basically the equivalent of Luffy's Gamu Gamu no pistol. You know, it's the most simple ability in his repertoire, and I could see it being very, very useful, especially if he grew up in sort of like a scrapyard sort of environment. He could practice using this ability all the time to, like, repel, you know, weapons coming after him. Like, if it was kind of a rough and tumble sort of area where he lived, maybe the kids, you know, were, like, bullying him one day and they picked up, like, metal rods to, like, hit him with. He ate this fruit and he can, like, bounce them all back. And not even that, like, later on, most of the weapons the Marines utilize are made of iron. You know, you got, you know, swords and stuff which are steel, which I assume would also be magnetic. Okay, there's iron in it, so I imagine it would be magnetic. So swords, spears, anything like that, arrows from, like, crossbow bolts or whatever, he can bounce all of that back with his ability. And then even guns, you know, guns, I'm assuming there's more modern firearms that could be made out of, like, plastic. They don't actually have to be made out of metal anymore. I imagine most guns are, but you probably could make guns that are not made out of metal, or at least some substance that isn't magnetic. But this is the One Piece world where we're dealing with, like, flintlock revolvers and, you know, flintlock rifles that are made out of, like, rolled iron, okay? And so obviously that's going to be magnetic as hell. So yeah, when Kid and Killer decided to head out to sea and become actual pirates, that would have been a devastating ability. You know, the Marine battleship approaches, even with just this basic ability, probably the first thing that Kid learned in his, like, you know, the magnet fruit, like, evolution tree. If it's like an RPG or something, you've unlocked Repel, the first level skill. It's like a first level spell kind of thing. Even with just that alone, you know, it's like, there are pirates, men! Fire the cannonballs! And Kids just repel, boing. All right, well, get the ship close to them and we'll raid them with our swords and our guns! Repel. Psst. Swords and guns fly out of the Marine's hand into the ocean. Okay, men, use wooden sticks in your own fists, following the legacy of Garp the hero. If he could beat the enemy down, sir, all of our men are dead. Aw. At that point, Killer has used his Punisher blades to slice everybody apart. Kid and Killer do not mess around as pirates, all right? They don't screw around. Their body count that they have probably accrued in terms of just Marines alone is probably in the triple, probably maybe even the quadruple digits. They don't mess around, okay? When it's like a Marine ship coming after the Straw Hats, they're all like, hey guys, Marines! And they fire the cannonballs, and Luffy uses Gumu Gumu no Balloon to bounce them away, and Sanji kicks them, and Zoro cuts them. Whatever, not a big deal, right? And then the Marines are like, grrr, we'll get you next time, Straw Hat pirates. And Luffy's like, she. Okay, next time then. Yo, no. Killer and Kid, when they come to town, they slice the damn Marine battleship in half, light it on fire. All those Marines are dead. You know, they do not give a shit. Okay, yeah. So that's just repel. So just, I have to move on because there's other moves and everything like that, but just the inherent ability to just repel any sort of magnetic object, insanely useful in the applications in battle, okay? So the next technique he uses is Punk Gibson. Of course, named after Gibson, which is the company that manufactures, guitars. Nope, sorry, over here. So I did put it over there, but my my beanbag was kind of covering it. So here is my guitar over here that I do not know how to play whatsoever. That is not a Gibson, though. That is a Zenny. It's Z-E-N-Y. I don't know. I don't know anything about guitars. That's something else. If anybody knows about guitars or, punk bands from the 70s and 80s, I don't know why that would be relevant. That's something else that people can comment. Anyway, yeah, so Punk Gibson, this is the technique where, and Kid even used this back before he lost an arm to Shanks, but he basically just makes a giant mechanical arm out of scrap metal and then boom, slams his enemy with it really hard. It's basically just... Here comes the giant fist! Oh my god, there's so many giant fist references I have made in the last month of talking about One Piece, but that is literally what this is, okay? And he used this technique, it was unnamed at the time, but he used this during Sabaody, right? So he used Repel to bounce back all of the cannonballs against the Marines, and then he gathered up all of their swords and guns and all the cannonballs, all the metal, the cannons themselves, all the metal around the area, compressed it together in the shape of a giant hand, and then just slammed it into the ground. I believe this was also the technique he used against Apu when he saw him at Onigashima, okay? Now, ever since he did lose an arm to Shanks, I'm kind of curious exactly how that exchange went, but he did lose an arm to him, and so therefore, using his magnet powers in a similar way to Sparrow can make an arm out of candy, Kid can make an arm out of anything metal, okay? And I'm sure it was like an actual prosthetic. I mean, if he does lose the prosthetic, or if the prosthetic is damaged, he can just cobble together some metal and just make a decent metal arm. Very clearly, it is a robotic arm that he's using right now, okay? And I think he designed it himself. I like to think that Kid, on top of being the captain of his crew, is also one of the lead shipwrights in his crew because of, his engineering mechanic background, right? So I like to think after he lost an arm, he was really pissed, and for a few weeks, he was walking around with just a cobbled-together metallic arm made of scrap metal, but then eventually he did sit down and then actually plan and, build and make blueprints and actually build an actual metal arm, like a robot arm, and he just keeps it attached to him and he can move it with his magnetic field, okay? And then we have Punk Rotten, which is the equivalent, I would say, to Luffy's gears. I don't know if you want to say, well, maybe if Punk Gibson is sort of like gear third, where Luffy makes a giant fist and then Kid makes a giant fist. Punk Rotten might very well be his gear fourth ability, or his equivalent, okay? It allows him to make a giant robot, okay? Very, very clearly, the longer that he's had this fruit, the more control and finesse he's had exactly in how he structures the metal, okay? At Sabaody, when he made Punk Gibson, it was literally just a bunch of scrap metal in the vague shape of a hand. There's a far cry from just gathering some metal together with a magnetic field and then actually being able to control and mold it and shape it to the point where it actually makes a robot with arms and legs and a face. And once again, you're not carrying this metal around with you all the time. It's just whatever happens to be around in the surrounding battlefield. So if Kid were to happen to go to an island where there was no metal, where maybe there was a bunch of nomadic people that just didn't have metallurgy or didn't have the access to iron or anything, and he just goes to an island and it's just wooden houses and wooden weapons and just trees, Kid would have no way to fight. He would just be devastated immediately. It is we have a bunch of wooden bats. We're coming at you, Eustass. He's like, no, please, repel. It won't work. It won't repel. And that's how Kid and Killer, that's how they meet their ends right there, right? Actually, you know what? I don't know how this would work because it's not refined iron, but there's iron, you know, in the ground, right? Like just raw iron or like pig iron or whatever you want to call it, right? So maybe it's a situation like Gaara from Naruto, where Gaara kind of carries, you know, the gourd with the sand on his back that's actually infused with his chakra. But even if he doesn't have access to that, or if it's not enough, he can just like grind up the earth to make sand. So let's say he lands on an island, in theory, that doesn't have access to metal. They don't have metallurgy or anything like that. But there is a deposit of iron, like, you know, deep down under the island itself. Like, there's not iron, but anything magnetic, any ore or metal or whatever. Could Kid, in theory, just like, you know, and then just like rise the metal out of the ground and like form things that way. Like iron sand, for instance, because that's a thing. And if iron sand is naturally occurring, he could like rip the iron sand out of a river or a stream or something, and then it would be, actually, there is a character in Naruto, the third Kazekage, that actually uses an iron sand ability, right? So would it be something like that? You think the iron sand would actually be more effective than just scrap iron or like swords or nails or screws or anything he could find lying around the battlefield. Iron sand, you could make like any shape you want, like a javelin or something, like a giant, like just an orb, a sphere of iron sand to just slam the enemy with, or like a pitchfork or something to impale them with, or something like that. That would actually be really useful. I think we've just thought of a new aspect of Kid's ability. Like I said, there's so much to really go on here. We've only seen a little bit here. Kid is not an idiot either. He's not just like, you know, oh, I make giant metal arm and hit you with it. I mean, he's a very violent individual, and he's a little bit quick to anger. You know, Eustass is a little hot-headed and all that stuff, so, you know, he's not going to bother a lot of times. Most of the time, making a giant metal fist and punching somebody with it will probably get your point across, right? But if he wanted to, he could probably, I mean, like I said, he probably built that prosthetic. He had enough wherewithal to build a giant robot, and that's not even the most intricate thing we've seen him make yet. So yeah, he's a smart guy. We just probably haven't seen everything he can do. So yeah, Punk Rotten is probably most likely named after Johnny Rotten, who was the lead singer of the Sex Pistols back in, you know, the 70s, 80s punk scene in England, right? And I even went back and I listened to Anarchy in the UK, because there was an actual name of the chapter was Anarchy in the BM, Anarchy in the Big Mom, you know, and so I just thought that was just a cool little title. But no, that was Oda making reference, because all of Kid's abilities are named, most of them, because like repel is obviously just like repel, just a magnetic force term. Also assign, which is his awakening, that's just like, you know, regular terms. But most of his techniques are named punk after the genre of music, and then like Gibson is the brand of guitars, and all I know about guitars is from what I've, you know, seen watching Fooly Cooley. So I know the Gibson EB0 1961 model, and the Flying V, because the Flying V is like the coolest guitar ever made. But anyway, yeah, that's that. And then Punk Rotten, named after Johnny Rotten, lead singer of the Sex Pistols. Punk Vice and Slam Gibson are other moves that he uses with the giant robot. Punk Vice is like he literally takes both fists, and he said it like a garbage compactor to Kaido. He's like, can you survive being garbage compacted, Kaido? Boom! Pump Vice! Slam Gibson is just like a straight punch with the robot. Then we have the Punk Pistols, named after the Sex Pistols. I guess Oda might also be a fan of Araki with JoJo Part 5, you know, Golden Wind. We have Mista with his Sex Pistols, or 6 bullets, I'm sorry. But anyway, yeah. By the way, can we also talk about, like, just in terms of, like, and I haven't listened to a lot of their stuff, but just in terms of, like, the name of a band, Sex Pistols has got to be, like, one of the best ones, right? I mean, it just works, okay? Anyway, so we have Punk Pistols, which are basically harpoon guns that he makes. Pretty much as soon as Kid first appeared and he showed what he could do with the magnetic fruit, I think a lot of people got into their heads, like, he can make cannons, he can make guns, he can make all this really cool stuff, and we do see that later. But this is the first example of this. He basically just makes a bunch of a harpoon gun, like Gatling gun launchers, and he can fire the harpoons at whatever. Now, normally this would be very devastating, but in the case when he used it against Big Mom, it didn't work because her body is like an iron balloon. And unfortunately, it's an iron balloon that is not magnetic in her case, and so, yeah, he fires the harpoons at Big Mom, but they just bounce off of her like they're not a big deal. But I want you to imagine that in any other situation. Kid can literally just pull a giant harpoon gun, like a harpoon Gatling gun, whenever he wants, just out of scrap metal, and just just fire giant, like 6-foot-long metal spears at you, and you just get gored by them, and you're just dead, right? So that's that. Then we have Punk Corna Dio! The JoJo references continue. Dio! which is basically just great bull demon. So first of all, being just the animal of a bull, right? Maybe also the running of the bulls might be a reference to this, because he makes them and it crashes right into Big Mom. But also there is the mechanical bull, which is like a game that you see at a lot of county fairs, especially out in the country, like where I am. Every county fair I've been to, there's always been a mechanical bull ride. You know, if you go to a bar somewhere, they'll have them as well. Let's see what else. Well, there's also the idea of the bull on Wall Street, which is like a giant statue of a bull on Wall Street in New York City, and it's made of metal, so that might be a reference there. And to be honest with you, it's really just kind of the same thing as Punk Rotten. Instead of just making a giant Megazord, you make a giant mechanical bull, right? A metal bull, but he can make it like any size he wants, right? Because as long as he has access to enough metal in the area, he can make this thing giant, even bigger than Big Mom, right? And so he makes this giant bull that Kid, of course, then, you know, he gets on the back of it and he's just like, yeah, Punk corner deal! And then boom, slammed into Big Mom so damn hard, it actually broke her arm at like 2 different points. And she had to use the soul power to heal it, or give life to the bones to heal themselves. But yeah, her arms were like, remember, they were broken at like 90-degree angles. It was really rough, right? Then, of course, we have his awakening ability he showcased next, which is a sign, where he allows to turn other people into magnets, where he can assign the north or south polarity, positive or negative, on any object he, you know, sees. It doesn't have to be a person. It could be another object, for example. Anything he can see, he assigns it, and then uses Punk Clash, or Punk Crash, because L's and R's, but it makes sense because The Clash is another name for a band. But also, like, crash is in you're crashing a bunch of metal onto the person that's the target, right? And so with the battle with Big Mom, he assigned, like, Big Mom the northern polarity, and then the southern polarity was for all of the everything else, like all of the metallic rebar and everything, all the metal pillars and steel beams that make up Onigashima. And it was quick too. It was like everything just got immediately ripped out of the walls and just crashed and hit Big Mom at breakneck force, okay? And it did slow her down for a while, right? She eventually turned the steel beams and stuff into homies, but the magnetic force was, like, still there, okay? It also seems to imply Kid could keep the magnetic force going a lot longer than he did. Once again, during that fight, he really did not want to let Law see all of the stuff that he could really do with his awakening. And so Law even asks him, like, how long can you keep that up? You know, the magnetic force. And Kid's like, you know, as if I would tell you, Trafalgar, you know, like, so it's implied maybe he might have ended the ability sooner just because of his pride, or just because Kid was so confident, like, they are going to defeat Big Mom, they're not going to die here today, and if he does defeat Big Mom, then, you know, Law is going to be his rival, and he doesn't want to show off everything he can do, right? So they kind of pulled their punches for a little while there. Maybe not a smart move against a Yonko, but eventually they do bust out, like, their strongest abilities to take her down, at least I could assume, right? So yeah, this is obviously on a whole new level than what was going on with Repel, or just the magnetic forces he was using up until this point. This was literally magnetic power on the level of, like, I don't know, the Hadron Collider in Switzerland. That's probably magnetic, I'm assuming. Like some of the most powerful magnets on the entire planet, to literally just, like, assign Big Mom the polarity, and everything metal in, like, I don't know, a few 100-meter radius around her just immediately just gets ripped out of the wall. Any screw or bolt that's holding it together just gets ripped apart and just slams right into her. The magnetic force had to be immense, okay? And it makes sense given that that was his awakening. The last ability we see him use so far in the manga is his Damned Punk, which is named after The Damned, another band. That's also a really good name. The Damned! Man, you know, there were some really cool band names back in, like, the 70s and 80s. There's some cool ones now, right? But, I mean, like, yeah, it must have been wild to live during that era. But anyway, yeah, Damned Punk, I assumed, was actually part of Kid's awakening, and it isn't. At least it's not put in the same category. So far, his awakening is like he uses a sign, and so anything that involves him assigning electromagnetism to anybody else other than himself, that's his awakening. And anything that he uses just for himself is not an awakening, hence Damned Punk, which is him just making a railgun! He makes the railgun. And once again, I mean, I've looked it up, and railguns are not, like, the most complicated device ever made, but still, I mean, there's stuff that goes into it. You have to have, like, a power source and everything. That leads to whole new questions, like, for example, could Kid, using the electromagnetism that his body inherently generates, could he just use that as a power source? Not Eneru could with his Goro Goro nomi. By the way, if this is what the geeky nomi looks like, I'm actually curious what the Goro Goro nomi looks like, right? But anyway, yeah, not to that level, obviously, but just, you know, once again, correct me if I'm wrong here, but just the ability to have a magnetic field and to summon this magnetic field whenever you want, like Kid can do, electricity is involved there. Electromagnetism has to be involved there. When I saw Dr. Stone, the whole thing was how they made a really strong magnet was they took a piece of iron, wrapped a copper wire around it, and it had to be zapped by a bolt of lightning, and then they made a magnet. Now, that's obviously a very crude way to do it, but, you know, I guess it would work in real life. I assume it would, right? So just the inherent ability that Kid has this power means that he can summon a little bit of electricity from his body, like he could just generate that. Maybe not infinitely, it would drain his stamina, but still, right? So he had this damned punk, this giant electromagnetic cannon, this railgun that he built, okay? And there's like moving parts and stuff in there, okay? And he's firing like laser beams from it, not a projectile, like laser beams and like electromagnetic bullets because it's anime, it's cooler. But he had like wires and cables like coming out of that thing and like running into himself, so maybe he like, you know, had enough technical know-how to make like a generator or like a battery, a crude battery, and then add that to himself, and then like the cables and stuff go into the battery, and then it powers the railgun and then shoots the laser cannon, and he just like unloaded on Big Mom, right? He's like just firing shot after shot while Law is off to the side using his ability to like open up the hole and then to drop her into that, right? So yeah, that's the last ability we've seen him use. It isn't an awakening, but you know, his awakening itself, even if it is just the assign, which I like to think there's probably going to be other stuff involved there he didn't show, and also other abilities he could just pick up later. But still, this is an insanely powerful devil fruit in the right hands. And you know what's crazy? Eustass might be a very adept user of it, but I don't even think like he's the best one that could have this fruit. Imagine if there was somebody, because, you know, he might know stuff about like mechanics and things like that, right? But, he, you know, Kid is not a scientist. He's not on like the level of Vegapunk or anybody like that, right? But imagine if you got somebody like that. What if Vegapunk doesn't already have a devil fruit, what if Vegapunk ate this fruit? The wild shit he could do with that. Like, it would be crazy, right? Like, insanity. He could probably do stuff that I couldn't even think of, because once again, I don't know a lot about magnets. But yeah, he could probably make, like, I don't know, maybe like a perpetual motion machine with this power. An endless energy source, perhaps, you know, with the ability and with his technical know-how and how he's like so far advanced of everybody else in the world. You make crazy things. He could upgrade the pacifistas, you know, and everything like that. Maybe he could just make pacifistas. If it comes down to like maybe what you're picturing in your head and having like the technical know-how to like this piece goes here, goes here, goes here, maybe he could like not even use the pacifistas coming off an assembly line. He could just make them himself, right? He could just have a room filled with all the materials and he could just like pacifista, like he could just make them. Could be something like that, right? You know, maybe even out of scrap metal on the battlefield. I don't know. Could he use the magnetic force to like take a bunch of scrap and then maybe break it down so they're just like at their basic level? Like take a screw or something or a piece of metal rebar or something and like magnetize it to hit something until it's pounded apart into like iron dust or something, and then use that to make something else? I don't know. Not even just getting into the magnetic part of it, but I would imagine having some ability over an electromagnetic field. Could he like shoot lightning bolts at somebody? Once again, not as strong as Eneru, but still, could Kid just fire a lightning bolt at somebody and hit somebody with that, right? Doesn't matter. It's like heat, right? Like you could generate heat with magnets. I don't know. I really don't. I'm really off on my limb here. I have no idea, right? People are watching this like, no, Tekking, you can't generate heat with magnets. And then there's probably going to be somebody, actually, did you know you can? Okay, well, maybe Eustass could do that, right? And he could have, like, a super hot piece of metal that he charges up with electromagnetism or something else, and he throws at an enemy. I don't know, lights him on fire. I don't know, man. I also don't think Oda's going to go into great detail with this. We're not going to have a moment where Kid starts talking all this scientific, you know, formulas and equations and stuff he can do with his magnet power, right? He'll probably keep it pretty simple to giant fist, giant sword, railgun, giant robot, stuff like that, giant dragon, giant dinosaur. He can make anything out of it, right? So he'll probably just keep to simple stuff like he can make Truckosaurus. Oh, damn, Kid has to make Truckosaurus. I mean, come on. That would be the most perfect perfect ability for him. Giant dinosaur dragon made of metal and like car parts that could breathe fire. Oh my god, if anybody in the One Piece world could make something like that, it would be Eustass. Alright, well anyway, that's the video. I hope you guys enjoyed. You know what? I did write down a frog facts, but this video's taken a long time to make. I had to compile a bunch of bands and get a bunch of extra information. You literally have to know a little bit about magnets, a little bit about 1970s, 80s punk rock in the UK, and then I had to do research into that, and we'll do frog facts next time. Alright, thanks for watching, everybody. Kid could make a giant mechanical frog. There you go. Alright, later, everybody. Punk rotten!